Hello and welcome to Beyond The Capsule, the podcast brought to you to demystify the science on all things health and wellness. Designed by experts, created to empower you to live better and longer.
Hello, welcome to Beyond The Capsule. So today we're introducing Professor Justin Roberts, who is a professor of nutritional physiology applied to exercise and functional health at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. He's a registered nutritionist and fellow of the British Association for Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine, editor-in-chief and the Nutrition Evidence Database and chair of the Nutritional Therapy Education Commission. So with over 3 decades of experience in nutrition and sport and exercise physiology, Justin has worked with individuals across a diverse range of sports, including professional athletes and teams. And he's co-written a book with Ian Craig called Integrative Sport and Exercise Nutrition, which is an excellent, incredibly comprehensive resource for anyone interested in performance, exercise, nutrition, general health and well-being. So welcome, Justin. It's great to have you here with your wealth of knowledge.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries. Well, I've just read out your CV, but I just want it to be great to just get a bit of background into, your background and how you got into nutrition and exercise and sports performance.
Oh, God, that's a long story.
I know.
Yes, you said over 3 decades there. So, okay. So if we go back to the very beginning, I actually got into nutrition, believe it or not. I used to be a personal trainer after my first degree, and there was one day where we had these 2 huge bodybuilders come in from another company, and they were promoting this concept of personalized or individualized nutrition at the time. And we're going back to the late 80s here. And as soon as I found out that nutrition and particularly supplementation could impact how people advance their training, I was hooked. And I was kind of really interested to understand, like, why is it nutrition has a role to play and how does it impact the training response? And that kind of led me nicely into what I did for my master's degree and working with the Olympic Medical Association. And it led more towards an understanding of metabolism, and then that led me nicely into sport and recovery. So as I've gone through the years, it's been very much an interest, partly from my own experiences, but also from what I originally learned when I was a personal trainer. So my PhD was really kind of focusing on what happens when we do exercise, but also when we recover. So how the body metabolically responds and how sports drinks and nutrition have a role to play. And that led me into just a plethora of research I did with various different companies, various different diets, various different supplements to see how they impact training adaptations and performance.
Amazing. It's great now as well. I think there's so much more interest in that sort of holistic model of, we used to see, performance and exercise very separately from health and nutrition. And now I think there's a lot more support for research behind that holistic integrative approach.
I think there is. I mean, the book we've just written with Ian Craig is, if I just, without trying to promote the book too much, it was more.
You're welcome to.
It was more the fact that Ian approached me, I think it was about 3 years ago now, maybe even longer. And he was he had this great idea around a book being the first book on sort of nutrition for sport, but with a functional medicine or integrative medicine approach. And at the time, I just had so much going on. I just went, no, I can't help. And I don't, shouldn't really commit to writing a book. And being Ian, he kept on persisting. And eventually we wrote this book. And it took about 2.5 years to write with contributions from authors and researchers and practitioners, most importantly, from all around the world. And, what's really nice about it is that you've got the kind of balance between how a practitioner might think and how an academic or researcher might think. And what we try to do is create that kind of, what's the magic in the middle? So as a really good example, if you take the area of immune health, we have in the book a world-leading researcher who's studied immune health for sport and exercise versus a practitioner that uses the principles in live practice. And whilst they don't necessarily agree all the time, because the way things work in academia doesn't necessarily transcend or translate to real-world practice all the time, and we have to remember that most athletes don't train in a lab. So we have to try and appreciate the balance between academic practice and practitioner applications. So that's what the book tries to achieve, the balance between the two.
Yeah, and that's really nice, like just bridging that gap as well between academia and, clinical practice, which is incredibly useful, because I think a lot of people just sort of look at a research paper and sort of then, take that off on a journey, but actually, can you apply that into clinical practice, and how does it apply, if that makes sense?
I mean, obviously I'm going to always be a scientist at heart,
Yeah.
but also I've been a practitioner and, have worked with countless different people. But here's a great analogy. So if you imagine last year's or this year's London Marathon, I don't know how many runners there were, but let's just say there were 40,000 plus, okay? Do you think they all had the same diet? Do you think they had the same training program? You've probably got 40,000 different ways of finishing a marathon. And so from that perspective, this is why I like the idea of how do we look at people from an N equals 1 perspective, So I'm not dismissing the science at all. We need science to really understand and evolve our thinking. And of course, science is really based on a fairly reductionist approach, but it also looks at means and standard deviations, and therefore what can we deduce when you look at a larger group of people. But in the book, one of the things we do talk about is, I think it's in the first chapter, we present a nice picture which talks about the difference between, say, a meta-analysis and a scientific paper versus individual data. And so, I've been in many situations where practitioners and researchers have come up to me and they quote a meta-analysis or a paper that says, well, these studies all show that there's an effect going on. And sometimes my comment has been, have you actually read that paper? Because you've probably looked at the abstract, because that paper doesn't say what you just said. And then if you delve into one or two papers, what you might see is there is an effect on average. But then when you delve into the individual data, you might find that certain people respond in a very specific way and other people actually don't have an effect, or there isn't a benefit of taking a particular product. So you have to kind of look at how people are responding on effectively an N equals 1 basis to really apply the research. But we need the research and we need the practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of leading on to that, personalised, individualised nutrition they talk about a lot, and how important that is, particularly when you're looking at elite athletes and people interested in performance as such.
Yeah.
But I guess then you've sort of already touched on that, but it's then tricky to put that into a study to make significant, so you can say this actually does this, because everybody's responding differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, a great example, we did a study looking at one of my, for me personally, one of my most fondest studies was a study we did back in 2013, I think it was now, where the question was, can anyone do an Ironman triathlon? And it was really broad, but we really wanted to find out, if you could take an average person who hasn't done an Ironman triathlon, and if you don't know what an Ironman triathlon is, it's the longest one-day triathlon you can do. So swim, bike, run, but it's the longest you can do in a particular 24 hours. And it's very demanding, both physically and mentally, and of course in terms of the training. So we were interested to find out if you took an average person who might be a little bit sporty or a bit recreationally active, could they do an Ironman triathlon? And in doing so, you had people that were, shall we say, weekend warriors, just wanted to finish, just wanted to try and enjoy the ride. And you had people that really wanted to try and go for a personal best and see what they could do. And in doing so, you had to kind of give them a standardized program. But of course, the way they approached their diets were all very uniquely individual. And so it's trying to understand how the person responds and what works for them. And what I learned from that, and also my own background training, was everything's trial and error. If something doesn't work, try something different. But you've got to give it time. So the key with nutrition is consistency and time, in my humble opinion.
So I guess actually, I was just going to ask, so were there lots of volunteers for this study?
Yeah. At one point we had to stop recruiting because it was getting a bit silly. No, in absolute seriousness, I kind of thought we would get 5 or 6 people that would want to take part in such a thing. And we were inundated to the point that we ended up with over 100 people taking part in the study. But, and our limit was that was our limit for that particular study. But, and if anyone's watching or listening who were on that study, thank you so much, because that was just one of those remarkable studies that I was involved in.
So that's a really cool one. It's one of those things you think, I'd love to do that, but would I actually want to do it when I'm? And I still
speak to quite a few of them, obviously because they were a very diverse group from all around the country, and many of them still take part in sport because of being involved with that study. So
I think that sort of comes on to the fact that, so within research, when you're looking at elite athletes, are there things that you can translate or transfer into like you say, the weekend warriors, the average person that just wants to keep fit, gym goers, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought about this. I think the way I look at it is, an elite athlete is, if you like, at the upper end of the spectrum. So, if you take a very famous athlete who's an endurance runner, they would have been training for years, if not decades. And in doing so, they've metabolically adapted over time. So, for example, if you're an endurance runner and you want to, use fat as an energy source very efficiently, that takes a long time to train.
Yeah.
So to compare them to someone who's just starting out is probably the wrong way of looking at it. But we get a sense of maybe what the upper limits are or what is possible. And so I kind of think, if I compare someone who's just starting an exercise program versus someone who's really well trained, you'll see the spread of kind of metabolic changes that are going on in the body. So you can use it, but it's, I wouldn't compare an elite athlete to a non-athlete.
Yeah. And I guess with elite athletes, you're looking for these sort of small, tiny improvements to, just gain that edge. Whereas somebody that's starting from, say, zero or, never trained before, you're going to get massive changes. But
you do. And, with the elite athletes, it's more about sort of fine tuning and tweaking their kind of training, their diet, their lifestyle, and also their recovery is really important. Whereas for the novice or someone just starting out, it's about progression. It's gradual progression. That's the key thing.
Yeah. Consistency, as you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that sort of brings us on, because a lot of, what I've heard you talk about before is that, and the book's based on, not completely based on, but part of it is that health is going to drive performance. There's a big focus on health. So do you think this has been overlooked a lot previously, perhaps, when we're looking into sports nutrition?
I think it has. I think, if you've worked in a performance setting, the word performance is everything. So I've worked in environments where it's all about winning. It's all about competing, and anything else is kind of secondary. And I would, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't mention that I used to think that way as well. So when I used to compete a long time ago, it was all about how much I can push myself or how I can get the best out of myself. And sometimes at the expense of thinking about your health. So for example, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to do my PhD in recovery, because after many events, I used to feel exhausted, but also just wanted to eat anything, or you would kind of rush to, you weren't thinking about the quality of your diet all the time. And I'm not saying you should think about it all the time, but it is, there's that balance between health and performance. And one of the things we talk about in the book is more to do with how people respond. So a great example is if you imagine someone who is a recreational active person who is working full-time, busy parent, lots of other lifestyle demands, etc., but still trying to train or exercise, then they've got more demands on their body than someone who's probably got more time to rest, or they're being paid to compete, and they can balance that lifestyle, if you like, a bit better. And the point of that is that you then have to think about, how do you maximize the health of that individual to maximize the training ability and therefore the performance. So in the longer term, what we've kind of explored is this understanding of, if you focus on your health and how the body works and how the body uses nutrition, you'll probably sustain performance for longer, but you also get more out of the body in terms of performance as well. So instead of thinking of it as a short-term gain, what can we do for a long-term benefit? Yeah.
And I guess that comes into the recovery as well.
Yeah.
Would it? Yeah. So you're more able to recover and have a bit more longevity in your, I guess, career as an athlete.
And actually what's really, I hope Ian won't mind me saying this, but I was talking to Ian about this because, we're very different physiological types. I come from a power stroke endurance background. He's more from a middle distance running and athletic background. And one of the things we were talking about is how people respond to foods differently. So when I'm under stress or under demand, my body instantly wants to eat more carbohydrate, but I also know metabolically that's not necessarily the right thing for me.
Yeah.
Whereas for him, it's the other way around. He needs to eat more protein. And so it's really, this is what we mean about understanding how your body works, but also how the nutrition fundamentally feeds that system.
Yeah. I'm going to come on to some questions then about carbs and protein shortly, because what we thought we'd do, we've spoken about this earlier, but have put some questions that are more from a point of view of a say, a lay person, so not an elite athlete, but somebody that's, again, these are sort of weekend warriors, people that want to either improve fitness or maybe starting out or thinking of, you get a lot of people that suddenly decide to take on a challenge like perhaps Ironman or a marathon or something like that. So more from those lay people's perspective, because there's so much information. A lot of people go on social media and, cherry pick out this one thing that's going to be the solution to all their health needs. But often there's a lot of, I don't want to say fake news, but, perhaps we could say that. Yeah. Okay. Behind that. So yeah, if we can, put some questions about some myth busting questions. I mean, as a nutritionist, we've talked about gut health loads, but and utilise probiotics from the point of view of supporting actually a plethora of different systems within the body, but particularly when we're thinking about gut health. If you're exercising, is it a good idea to use probiotics? Consider gut health. What's going on there? I know that's a massive question.
Great question. I mean, I always start with, what's the person actually doing? Because if someone's eating a very, very good diet, so they've got a mixture of prebiotics in particular in their diet, then there may be a lower need for any other agents or nutrients. However, for most people who are doing long distance work, like endurance work or work that's really going to stress the body, then you might find that they start to get gut related issues, like gut distress, gut discomfort. And there have been a number of studies, including one of our own, that demonstrates a reduction in the degree of severity and frequency of those symptoms with training. So if you're, for example, going into a marathon or a triathlon or even longer distance, like repeated day events, there is evidence to show that over a kind of 6 to 12 week period, you can reduce the degree of the symptom severity with training, which might then impact the ability to actually train and continue the training. In some people, they can be very sensitive, and that might actually negatively impact their training.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where probiotics may have a role to play. There is some evidence that when it comes to performance itself, it's the research is mixed. There are some studies that suggest that there may be an effect on performance because you're able to get more out of the training. There are some studies that show that it might impact, for example, race pace, particularly in the latter part of a marathon. And then from a mechanistic perspective, there is the suggestion that it might impact how the gut functions. So whether that's improved microbiome diversity or whether that's improved gut barrier dysfunction or gut barrier function. It depends on the type of probiotic as well, because there are strain-specific effects as well.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of it's sort of coming back to the individual, but potentially it can be a useful thing to consider. And obviously, there's probiotics, but also, diverse diet can really support the microbiome as well.
Absolutely.
That's a useful thing.
And one thing we also need to remember is when you exercise, you also impact how the biome works as well. So physically exercising is a benefit.
Yeah, and we know the microbiome just has an impact on nearly every other system in the body, pretty much. Yeah. How about certain people that increase their exercise or start exercising a lot? And I know this can be an issue for, again, people that are doing a high amount of training, can potentially be more prone to infections, particularly upper respiratory tract infections. I don't know if you see that clinically. Yeah. So, what's going on there? Why is that? And anything we can do about it?
Most of the studies that have been done in this area, kind of people who are well trained, who have really gone out and pushed it, like done a training camp and they're really pushing it. So, but when you talk about the kind of less or more recreationally active person, it's probably because they're doing something quite unaccustomed for them physiologically. So if you train hard and you've gone above a particular threshold for you, there is that window, if you like, of opportunity where your body may be more susceptible to stress and infection. And so in the literature, you see reports of things like upper respiratory tract infections or immune suppression, which can happen kind of in that first, up to 3 days, shall we say, after an exercise bout. And there are studies showing that, you can have this effect in some individuals. They are more prone to URTIs, they're called, or upper respiratory tract infections.
But also exercise in the long term is quite protective for the immune system. Is that right?
You develop yeah, to an extent, yes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a number of different interplaying factors here. So, for example, the type of diet you're consuming, your lifestyle stress, other demands on you, for example, will all have a role to play. But as you start to train, I know there's authors that have referred to things like, for example, immune resistance versus immune tolerance, for example.
Yeah.
And so the immune resistance or resilience is how strong your immune system is versus the tolerance, which is your ability to cope or deal with immune invaders, shall we say, or pathogens. So you do build up a resistance over time, but of course everyone's individual, so it's how they actually respond to that that's important.
Yeah.
And that comes back to what we said at the very beginning of this N=1 approach.
Yeah. So again, looking at that individual, what's their immune system like? What are they doing? 100%.
So on the Ironman study, we had a number of individuals that were, even though we progressed gradually and we were kind of working on an individual basis, we did notice that some people seem to have these sort of symptoms more than others. Right. So I think there is a kind of susceptibility, and whether that's down to individual genetics, or whether it's down to how they've trained, or whether they've suddenly acutely ramped up their training. Yeah. Difficult to say.
Yeah. And you see that generally when there's, we're in December 25 at the moment, there's a bit of a flu, not epidemic. Yeah. There's a lot of flu going around, and you would see some people will be exposed to it and be completely resilient, and then others have, be in bed for 2 weeks. So it's kind of the same generally, looking at that N=1. Okay, creatine. I know I've kind of jumped completely from the immune system to creatine, but that's the next question on my list from the general public. Okay. So can creatine help to improve performance? What does it do? I know there's a lot of stuff in social media about creatine at the moment. It's quite trendy.
An article on it.
Oh, good. There we go. Off you go.
I mean, creatine is not a new nutrient. We've known about it for a long, long time. In fact, if you go back to the late 80s, early 90s, where it was booming when it came to bodybuilding and resistance training, we know that creatine can have an effect. And the key with creatine is that it helps to turn over the energy currency of our cells, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So if you're doing high intensity workouts or high explosive movements, you're going to use creatine fairly quickly, and there's a very limited amount in the body. Yeah. So you have this kind of turnover of creatine per day, which you could theoretically eat in your diet, but you'd be eating a lot. Right. And so this is where creatine supplementation comes in. I think the myth, or rather the kind of misnomer with creatine, is that people think if you take creatine, you're going to suddenly bulk up. You're going to build muscle. Well, that's a bit untrue, because you kind of need to work the muscles to physically grow muscle. Yeah. It's not just about the creatine. And we're now learning that actually if you take a much lower dose for longer, you can actually benefit to a similar effect, which can benefit how your muscles function as well. Mm-hmm. And even more recently, there's research now showing that creatine may have an effect on how your brain functions as well, in terms of things like mental focus, memory, attention, etc. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense, because if you improve ATP, I mean, every cell in the body is utilizing ATP. Mm-hmm. The brain's it's highly metabolically active, isn't it? There's a lot of energy that the brain uses.
It is. And the only thing is, whilst there are some really good studies that have just come out, some of the studies that have been done are quite small. So we need more research in this area. Yeah. I think the really interesting thing at the moment is creatine for women. Because that seems to be a hot topic at the moment, and certainly when I've looked into it, there is evidence to show that women could probably benefit from a low dose of creatine in their diet per day.
That's interesting, because I guess historically, like you say, sort of late 80s, 90s, it was very much seen as a bodybuilder's supplement. And I guess also women may potentially have lower protein intake generally. Yes. I know that's a real big generalization.
I would actually say no, because some of the studies we've it's a real mixed bag, because it was some of the studies we've measured dietary intake. Yeah, the women have been just as if you look at it relative to their body weight, it's just the same as the men. And but within both groups, you'll see high and low intakes as well. So the last study we've just done, we had low end intakes of 0.8 grams of protein per kilo. Yep. and we had high end of 2.2 grams per kilo, and the average was 1.3.
Right.
So,
okay.
Most people we've worked with who are, shall we say, recreationally active or average individuals, the protein intake's been quite normal.
Yeah.
But if you've got someone who's maybe a vegetarian or vegan or is on a lower protein intake, yes, that's probably where their creatine levels, particularly in their muscles, will be potentially lower.
Okay. So do you think, the research behind, sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but the research behind women's sort of sport, endurance, exercise is sort of catching up a little bit. Do you think there's a difference in the way women should train compared to men?
Ooh.
So I've thrown a curveball in there.
That's a curveball. Certainly when you look at most research, whether it's on creatine or other, women are very underrepresented, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons behind that is controlling studies. So it's kind of easier to standardize a group of men.
Yeah.
But we need more studies on women, full stop.
Yeah.
It's an area that I think over the next decade will grow, at least.
Yeah.
We are seeing more, but on average, if you take 100 studies, probably less than a third have women involved.
Yeah. Interesting. I think across the board, when we look at, nutrition, exercise, we were talking about sleep, research behind women really changes as well.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be more focus on it. There's definitely more stuff in the media at the moment. So that's probably hopefully pushing it a little bit as well. So you've sort of touched on sports drinks as well, and also maybe that sort of comes slightly under that creatine umbrella. So do you need to take a sports drink when you're working out or afterwards? And can you make your own as well?
Yes, yes, you can. So I think like sports drinks, I think the starting point is, why do you need a sports drink?
Yeah.
So when people, I've seen this before. I've actually sat in a gym on a bike doing my exercise and looked around me, and there's 3 people drinking a sports drink, and they're on the bike for 10 minutes. It's like, well, what's that sports drink actually doing apart from maybe psychologically, you think it's making you feel good. But ultimately, what a sports drink is, it's sugar, it's carbohydrate. Yep. So you then come back down to, why are you training? Is if the purpose of the goal is to burn fat, lose a bit of weight, improve your body composition, then you probably don't want to compete with carbohydrate metabolism too much. In other words, not taking a sports drink might be better. However, if you're going to go out and train for, say, a marathon, where clearly carbohydrate levels in the body are going to decline, that's where sports drinks have a role to play. Yeah. So if I was doing a session that was under an hour, probably wouldn't necessarily bother too much with taking a carbohydrate or a sports drink during the session. I'd wait until after, where I could recover quickly. If I was doing anything that was a little bit longer, maybe sort of up to 90 minutes, or if you're doing more sustained training beyond 2 hours, that's where the carbohydrate can have a role.
Yeah. You're kind of already touched on this, but one of the question is about macronutrient intake. So, and it's, again, we've talked about individualized and personalized nutrition, so I think you're probably going to say the same. But when is it more appropriate to utilize sort of ketogenic diets of fat for energy as opposed to carbohydrates for energy? And again, I think I've just given you a massive question.
You have. And actually, I just realised I didn't answer the last question about, can you make your own sports drink?
Oh, yeah. So, we can.
So I'd encourage everyone to go and buy the book and read chapter 16. So Ian's partner, she's a natural chef, and she constructed a number of the sports drinks in the book, and they are phenomenal. So one of them, for example, to make a sports drink, you just need, sugar. Water, salt, or electrolytes. But what they've done is very cleverly made a natural homemade sports drink, which they've actually tested, and we've had other people take it as well and come back with lots of comments. But something as simple as pomegranate juice with water and like a Himalayan salt or equivalent, but very small amounts. You can make a very simple sports drink. But I'd encourage you to go and look at the book, because we've had those kind of tried and tested. So it's good.
Taste tested as well.
Taste tested, yeah.
Excellent.
But yeah, of course, I'm not going to say that commercial products don't work, because we've done research on them to show that they can work. So, but that hopefully answers the question. You can actually make your own sports drinks.
Excellent.
And you can make your own protein drinks, and you can make your own gummies as well. Read the book. So keto diets, So again, for me, it always comes back to what's the person training for.
Yep.
So I did a talk. Oh, where was it? I think it was to a group of runners, and we did a talk about carbs versus fat. What's better? And at the end of it, there was one individual that kind of put his hand up and said, nice talk, fantastic, etc. But I've been on a ketogenic diet for 6 months. So I'm really outperforming everything I did in the last 6 months. So that for them, that ketogenic diet really helped. And then I've had other people that have said the absolute opposite. They've been on a keto diet for a few weeks and really felt awful.
Yeah.
So it comes down to how your body handles the foods you eat.
Yeah.
So you can train the body to become more adapted to fat by eating more fat in your diet, so a keto type diet. But you have to adapt to that, and that can take anything from days to weeks, depending on how your body responds.
Yeah.
So you can get your body into ketosis within a few hours to days, but it's how your body metabolically adapts over time impacts whether you get the benefits or not. For most people that I've worked with who have been on a keto diet, it's short term, and it's normally very strategic, like they want to lose a bit of weight.
Yeah.
They want to get their body fat down, or they want to try and use it to try and enhance various short-term adaptations that in the early part of their training, which may pay off later on.
Yep.
But here's a key thing. If your training is about performance, where high intensity is central, then keto diets impact particular enzymes, which then impact energy turnover.
Right.
So you need carbohydrate for high intensity performance.
Okay.
So if someone could show me a keto diet that really enhances high intensity performance, I'd be impressed.
Okay. You obviously haven't seen that yet. So high intensity.
So if you've got someone who's doing like a marathon and it's lower intensity sustained efforts, that's where it might have an effect.
Yeah.
But if you're now looking at trying to enhance performance within that marathon, it could be, for some people, negative.
Is it useful for some people to some people that flex? I know it's difficult because the body doesn't always adapt very quickly, but flex between ketogenic diets.
So this is kind of my particular research area of interest. It's where I'm interested in the most, because I've always been fascinated why, if we all went into the lab and put you on one of our bikes and we put a respiratory mask on you and we measured your oxygen consumption and your carbon dioxide output, we can start to work out how much fuel you're burning in terms of fat or carbohydrate. And what's interesting for me is if I get someone who's really well trained and we put them on a bike, it takes a long time for their body to kind of, if you imagine you're exercising at a low intensity, and then a medium intensity, then a high intensity, and so on. For them, they can burn fat a lot longer until they start to really react and their body now needs more carbohydrate. But if you go and get an average person who's not really doing a lot of exercise and you put them on the same bike, same equipment, same time of day, everything's standardized, what we tend to see is as soon as they start exercising, their body starts to utilize carbohydrate a lot quicker. So their fat burning curve, if you like, is almost negligible. It decreases very quickly. So for me, this metabolic flexibility in part is the ability to shift between fuels when you need them. And I think that can be trained. And I think also diet has a role to play here as well. So I'm very interested in how you can increase that gap between, should we say, low flexibility and high flexibility.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. It'd be, great to see what you find.
And some of the early work on the keto diet showed that you can increase. So most people, when you're exercising, you don't burn much fat at all. And if you can get 0.1 to 0.5 grams per minute, you're doing well. So the ketogenic diets that are from the early research sort of showed that you can go above 1 here. So that's where the high fat diet could have a role to play. But also, if you're burning more fat and finding the exercise a little bit easier or a little bit more comfortable, you're probably going to tolerate it for either longer or more frequently. So that's where the metabolic flexibility could be interesting.
Excellent. I didn't actually, probably should have just clarified at the beginning what we mean by a ketogenic diet. Do you want to take that one?
So a ketogenic diet is effectively where there's many types of keto diets. That's the other thing. But if we look at it in its simplest sense, it's where you're basically dropping carbohydrate down to a certain level. And in doing so, you've effectively got a low carbohydrate, high fat approach. But there are different varieties of keto diets and applications as well.
Perfect. Thank you. And then how about, it's sort of under the same vein, but fasting, is it, I don't want to say is it better, but what's the difference between exercising on a fast versus after eating? And
so again, it comes back to what are you training for?
Yeah.
So if you train in a fasted state, you will amplify certain mechanisms for sure. So if I'm on an empty stomach, you'll switch on some of the kind of mechanisms that are linked to mitochondrial function or fat burning quicker, or you'll have more of an adaptation there. So if you're looking to lose weight or burn fat or even use fat as an energy source during exercise predominantly, then training in a fasted state helps with that.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to time.
Yeah.
So, this is why if you look at sort of people that have been training for marathons for years, what you tend to find is that some of them don't actually take an awful lot in the first 10 miles because they're training their body to use fat as an energy source. And so they probably won't start touching sports drinks or even caffeine until later on in the race. So this is where fasted training can be beneficial. So if you're looking for a metabolic change in that sense, that's where fasted training could be useful.
Yeah.
If you're training for kind of like high intensities, like resistance training, potentially more carbohydrate before could be beneficial because you're using high intensity pathways,
and you've got that energy there ready to utilize.
Yeah. And also I think the other thing is if you look at how much carbohydrate you store in your body, particularly your muscles, it's quite limited. So if you're going in with low levels of carbohydrate, then chances are you're going to feel it towards the end of the session anyhow.
Yeah.
So this is why if you're doing harder efforts, you probably want to be fed before you go in.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so we've got a question about, elite athletes. So example was a ballroom dancer who doesn't want to eat too much. They don't feel too full. They're quite nervous. So that, from a digestive point of view, they don't really feel like eating, but also they need something that's going to give them a bit of energy to maintain, to actually perform adequately. So what's an easy, if that's the right word, or a simple thing they can do?
So whilst I'm not an expert on ballroom dancing, I think a lot of it comes down to, how long is it going on for? What's the, is the competition a single event or is it multiple events over the day?
Yeah.
If you look at other sports, for example, they have multiple heats over a day.
Yeah.
So if it's multiple, then there's a bit more of a challenge because it's not a question of just eating something afterwards and recovering. Because you might have to, a next event. So when we've done this with other types of athletes, one of the things we focused on is making sure in the lead up to the day, what are they doing in the 2, 3, 4 days beforehand, so they know they're not depleted. That's a key thing. So mentally, it's like, okay, I know I can perform because I've topped up and I'm at my peak. And then on the day, it's really about managing the way they feel. So we used to use, for example, very weak kind of diluted sports drinks with electrolytes just to sort of just sip on. It's just that keeps that gentle bit of energy going in. We did try different things, caffeine, for example, but it doesn't always work. So we were kind of careful with that, trial and error. And then just easily digestible snacks. So something simple like half a banana, or something that is not going to be too much load on the stomach. It makes you feel like you've at least got something that's gone in. But I think also not doing it too soon to the event. So some people, I've had this question before, which is why is it that some people can eat, half an hour before they do any sport, and other people have to eat 2-3 hours before? I think a lot of it's psychological. I think for some people, if they're going to eat a meal, it takes a longer time to digest. They should do that 2, 3, 4 hours beforehand. But in the case of a competition, I think it's just about small bite-size chunks, and then, or bite-size feeds. And then afterwards, if you've got like a 2-3 hour window, that's where you get your kind of recovery snack in. Yeah. So I think keep it simple and manageable, but also you learn as you go along. So in one competition, you might do one thing, and another you might do another. Yeah. But I think over time you adapt to you. Yeah. So I think that's key as well. I used to get very nervous before my events, and whilst mine was different, I knew that I had that big window afterwards to recover. And I remember when I finished competing at the very end, it was like, I'm not nervous at all because I'm so used to it. So you do gain with experience as well. Yeah. Yeah. But I always maintain that hydration. That was kind of an important, irrespective. So
So the hydration, much more sort of.
Yeah, but I'm not
focus.
talking about drinking like 2-3 liters in one go. I'm thinking like just
Sips.
gentle, just little sips. So it also takes your mind off things as well. Just to make sure you're not dehydrated going in or kind of thinking about the nerves.
Okay, we sort of talked about fat and carbs. What about protein and protein powders? Are they a good idea for training? When are they? When's the again big question?
Oh, good. You're coming up with some good questions today. I like it. Protein is an important macronutrient. It's in my opinion, it's probably one of the most important. Ironic when people really start talking about, everyone needs lots of protein. I'm not so sure because I think first and foremost, establish what people are doing.
Yeah.
Again, when we've measured people's natural intake in their diet over time, we've actually seen they're kind of anything between 1.1 and 1.6 grams per kilo, which is actually quite moderate to high in some cases.
Yeah.
So for them, it's really about maintaining what they're doing. However, if you've ever tried to eat a high protein diet from purely your food, it can be done, but it gets kind of a bit monotonous because you're always thinking about, right, what's the next meal? What have I got to cook now?
Yeah.
And so protein powders can be a more convenience perspective or an easy on the go type perspective, especially if you're at work and you're thinking like, what can I do downstairs? I've got a protein drink here ready to go. So of course, protein powders are made up of different types of protein. You've got isolates and concentrates, etc. So if I was looking for a protein powder, I'd probably number one focus on quality. So I'd probably edge towards isolates more than concentrates or a mixture. I would, the other question is whether you want a faster releasing protein than a slower releasing protein. So things like whey versus casein come into play. And I'd probably, unless you're looking to bulk up, probably try to limit the amount of carbohydrate or sugars in the product as well. Sometimes they have added maltodextrins for weight gain. So quality is probably the key thing. If I was an athlete and I'm likely to be tested, I'd also want to make sure they've been batch tested at some level, informed sport tested.
Yeah. So informed sport is products that have been specifically tested and then sort of certified for use by.
But in the US and the UK, there's different affiliations. But you can some companies have their products batch tested, which means that they can verify that the majority of banned substances or the main substances that could crop up are not in there, or there's no contaminants that shouldn't be there, should we say? So there's a degree of kind of assurance that the product is of a high quality. In that sense.
Yeah, and for those people that just sort of surfing the net looking for a good quality protein product, so try and make sure there's not loads of other additives, etc. in there. It can be tricky.
The higher quality, the better, should we say?
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Sort of moving on, really, complete change of subject. So we were when we were chatting earlier, we sort of talked about this, how as you get older, things start to, you start to get a bit of knee pain, for example, not feeling as fit. Some people sort of get to a certain point and go, do you know what, I'm too old to exercise. What's the issue with that? How can they help maintain exercise into older age?
That's a trick question. The issue is it's the mindset. Weigh it up. So if you do nothing versus doing something, which is better? So I think if I was going to answer that, it would be what's most important to you. So if you're completely sedentary, there's more risks involved with being completely sedentary than there is actually moving and doing something. So for me, the key words are consistency. What can you do consistently? And what can you do that's manageable for you within the context of your lifestyle? So we've had this before where people are starting out on an exercise program, but they don't have time. Time's the biggest issue that I seem to be faced with when I talk to people. So, think about what you can do to break up your day. Maybe an easy way of starting is to do micro exercise. So it could be like, instead of sitting at your desk all day, and we all do it, including me, is it a question of, maybe taking every hour, just taking 5 minutes and just go for a walk outside, or just stand up and move a little bit more. And there's a lot of research around things like standing desks now, and just simply standing just changes how you're.
Yeah, sitting's the new smoking, isn't it? As we're sat down.
Yeah, that's right. We are basically, so micro exercise is a key thing, I think. And then I think progression. So having a plan that you can just, if you look at, say, the Couch to 5K program, the whole point of that is it's within your ability and it's progressing slowly. So that's a key thing. I think what I've seen people, and again, hands up, I did this when I was training. I think a lot of people go into their training and they ramp it up too quickly, too soon. And that's why they either injure themselves, or why they have pulled muscles, or horrendous muscle soreness, or they stop training because of it, or they get ill.
Yeah.
So I think it's slowly.
Yeah, 100%. And there's that adage, isn't it? You don't get old. You don't stop playing because you get old. You get old because you stop playing as such. I think.
Right.
So the more you can keep going for as long as you can, the better that is for you.
I'd also add this word to it as well. Okay. Make it fun.
Yeah.
I mean, when people talk to me, when we're younger and if you're involved with sport, you do it because ask yourself why you played sport. Yeah. Because you enjoyed it. It was fun. Or you were with people, or you enjoyed doing your own thing. I think it's the same now. Even as people get older, I think it's about working within your confines. If for example, you have, I have a knee issue, for example, so I'm not going to start doing squats every day with whatever weight on my shoulders.
Yeah.
But I will move as much as I can, and I think it's about functional movement.
Yeah.
So it depends on what your goal is, and it depends on what you can fit in with your lifestyle.
Yeah. And actually, maybe this is changing a bit in modern lifestyle, but actually if you look at children, they naturally move a lot. And we do sort of stop that. We start working 9 to 5, like you say, sitting at a desk, and then go, I'm too tired now to go and do anything, because so it's all.
And as I've got a bit older, I think, a lot of my training used to be evenings. And as I've got older, it's more, maybe I should do it in the early part of the day, because then it's done. Number one, tick.
Yeah.
Okay. But number two, you actually set yourself up for the day quite nicely.
Yeah.
Your positivity changes, your enthusiasm, your motivation changes, you're more alert. The negative of that is you do start feeling a bit more tired earlier on towards the end of the day. So maybe it's getting that natural circadian pattern.
And actually, there was a question about what about people that feel really like exhausted, like they don't want to work out, but actually it's probably beneficial for them in the long term. Other things they can do, but that's probably quite a good idea to do it earlier in the day.
I think the first thing is, to really get a kind of understanding of what the person does. Because if, for example, you look at their lifestyle, their home life, their work life, you might find little micro periods in the day where you go, okay, if at lunchtime, instead of taking an hour just sitting down, why don't you take half an hour to eat your food and then go for a little walk?
Yeah.
And that might be more beneficial than just doing nothing.
Yeah.
And that simple 20-minute walk might be the starting point.
Yeah. And I think people sometimes get overwhelmed and going, I've got to go to the gym for an hour or something like that. That's almost too much. Like you say, if you get those micro movements in.
Yeah. And I think also it's like, a little bit breeds a little bit more. It keeps you moving forward. And that's the key thing.
Yeah, definitely. And so talking about time of day of exercising, what about the impact exercise has on sleep? And how important is sleep?
Yeah, again, it can have an impact on sleep, both positively and negatively.
Yeah.
So if you're exercising, there are studies showing that you can improve the quality of your sleep and that delta wave activity or sleep wave activity from the type of exercise you're doing. But if you're training too late in the day, or if it's too hard, a vigorous exercise, for example, late in the day, that can also impact on the quality of the sleep negatively as well.
Yeah.
So I think it comes down to what you're training for.
Yeah.
And is it actually impacting your sleep or not?
Yeah.
So a great example is we used to have swimmers that were, they had to train late at night because that's when the pool was available, and then they're training early in the morning. So a lot of their sleep was disrupted. And so you're looking for strategies for how they eat after training and recover and get up early. Yeah. And it's quite interesting. That's where the proteins often come into play as well.
Yeah, interesting. And actually, I'm throwing in a curveball, but I seem to remember something about you when Usain Bolt got his world record. He had a nap about half an hour before he'd just woken up or something. I
didn't know
don't.
that.
Okay, there was something. I remember them saying something like that. That just made me. Yeah.
I mean,
made
a
me
lot of
think.
athletes do take micro naps.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason for that. It's partly recovery, but also it can impact on things like growth hormone and certain metabolic hormones that can impact performance. But also, it just keeps you kind of in that calm state as well.
Yeah.
You know, so you're not always in a heightened or cortisolemic state. So
yeah, I wonder if people that are better sleepers tend to be improve their performance a bit more. It'd be interesting.
Good question.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Look at it. Have a look. Yeah, there you go. That's your next project.
Probably is the answer.
Yeah. So what about people that are, like we say, regular exercisers, maybe go to the gym a few times a week, but then suddenly want to do a big, take on a challenge, I don't know, decide to run the London Marathon or something like that? How can they start? What's a good starting point? And
God, you're throwing some biggies at
I
me
know,
today.
sorry.
Actually, to be honest, I've got so one of the biggest events in the world is the Marathon des Sables, which is a 7-day ultra marathon in the Sahara Desert. And we are seeing an increase in people that are doing exactly that. They're kind of, they're getting to that point where they just want to go and do something crazy, and let's go and do a run across Sahara. And I have actually done that event, but we'll come back to that separately maybe. But interesting enough, the key with it is to understand why you're doing it. Is it because you want to achieve a goal, or is it because it's a life ambition? And for going back to the marathon, it's more. Don't look at it as a mountain you've got to climb. Look at it as day one. What can I do today? And build a gradual plan. So the people that seem to do really well in these events is because they've prepared. They've built up over time. It's not like I've entered it and 2 months later I'm just going to do it. I mean, you can do that. Some people do that. But the ones that seem to enjoy it the most are the ones that have actually prepared in advance, and they built up gradually over time. So their body has adapted and got used to it.
I think you were saying before, if you're training for something like that, it's really important to think about eating the foods that you will be eating if you're going to use sports drinks, train with those.
So if you look at the key principles of training, and I won't bore you to death with a history lesson here, but if you go back to all kind of the history of sports science and where it comes from, the concept of progressive overload is key. So you've got to just kind of get that body to a point. It's like when you go up a mountain, you don't just walk up it, you kind of acclimatize as you go up the mountain. Same with training, you build your body gradually over time. And, you get to a point where your body is used to a certain threshold, and then you push a bit more and you gradually change that. So one of the concepts is progressive overload. The second concept is making it specific to the sport. So whilst you do get crossover, let's just say you're a swimmer, swimming is obviously, you're going to adapt to swimming, but you can also adapt to running. You get crossover effects between the types. So coming back to the marathon, the way training works is you always have like different phases of your training, whether it's a base phase, a progression phase, a competitive phase, or whatever it is, and also a recovery phase. And within that, you might have micro cycles as well. So, or we call them mesocycles. So you might have like an easy week, a medium week, a hard week, and then a recovery week. So you can really break up your training accordingly. And so from a marathon perspective, as you get closer to the race, you want to start building in or testing your own strategy. So the biggest mistake I see people make, by the way, and I stopped doing this because it was getting a bit annoying, but about 5 years ago, and before that, I was every year, about 2 weeks before London Marathon, I would get a plethora of phone calls from people going, "Hi, Justin, I want to change my nutrition, or what should I do for my nutrition for the marathon?" It's like, you got 2 weeks to go. Probably not a lot, because nutrition takes time. And the people that I've interviewed after a race, like a marathon, and they've had negative, issues, whether it's gut distress or gut discomfort, or they didn't do as well as they thought, or their pace dropped off. When we've interviewed them afterwards, most of them, they've done something very abruptly at the end. Like they've suddenly introduced a new sports drink, or they've suddenly changed their diet, or the biggest one is they've carb loaded like 2 days out, and they've not been used to carb loading at all. So that's why they've responded negatively. Their body hasn't adapted. So for people that are doing things like marathons and ultra marathons, it's around trial and error. Like learn what works for you. And the problem with that is if you try it on one day let's just say you do a long run and you try a particular strategy, it doesn't mean it's going to work the next week or the week after.
Yeah.
It's kind of over time. And you'll learn very quickly what works for you and what doesn't. And I've had plenty of athletes that have said absolute polar opposites of each other for the same race. So some people have thrived on a 15, 20-minute fueling strategy. Others have thrived on a not eat anything for X miles and then sort of consume sports drinks. But it's because that's what they've trained to do.
Yeah.
So you've got to kind of progress and build that into your training.
Yeah. I think the real message we're getting is, get to know your own body, obviously, and consistency as well is obviously key.
And the thing is, with things like a marathon, when I say it's short term, I mean it's for most people like 4 to 6 hours, that sort of window. But then you can recover.
Yeah.
If you're doing a multi-day event where you've got to carry all your food, and somewhere like Sahara where it's you haven't got fresh food, it's packaged food, it's expedition foods, you've got to get used to that. So it takes a bit of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm jumping around again because we're going to talk about wearables, please. So wearable devices, how useful are they? Do you think, and do you think where do you think that may go as well? Can we be utilising them in research a bit more?
Again, this is probably the difference between people that are not really doing much sport or exercise versus those that are. The ones that are tend to use things like Garmin's and various trackers. I think they're useful. I think they're good for monitoring. And when I've been at personally, when I've done my own monitoring and I've been competitive, for example, in myself, it's because I've been tracking certain metrics and looking at changes in things like my heart rate or body composition or even strain on the body. So I think it can be useful.
Yeah.
I think for some people there's a risk of data overload and kind of accuracy as well.
Yeah.
So the one I'm wearing, for example, it can become loose if it gets too tight. For example, you loosen it off, and then is it accurate what you're actually looking at?
Yeah.
But I think it is beneficial in cases where, especially people that are trying to get into a program, you can actually monitor your own progress over time, which is kind of useful.
Yeah, and I think particularly from a clinical point of view, and we look at nutrition, if people aren't noticing changes that quickly, then it often, they can sort of fall off the wagon, those habits drop off. Yeah. But, if you're actually seeing those metrics that are improving.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful.
And that's a key thing, because as you just said, it's everyone wants results, tomorrow.
Yeah.
It takes time, unfortunately, especially if you're looking at how the body physically adapts as well. So I think to see something in the short term on a metric that's showing you are making progress is going to be psychologically and physically beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. We've done another podcast with Jo Botel, and she was talking a lot about phytonutrients, and she looks at those in relation to exercise. I just wonder if, do you think there's a place for those with elite athletes?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, it's also another area I'm interested in, which is polyphenols and phytonutrients. Yeah. I think we're at the kind of early days of research. I think we're still trying to learn a lot more. There are some mainstream products out there that, like tart cherries, for example, beetroots. I know it's not strictly a polyphenol, but the nitrates in certain products can have an impact on physiological mechanisms. I think we've got a long way to go. We are really understanding some of the mechanisms that occur with consumption of acute polyphenols and also chronic ingestion. Yeah. The challenge with this is, again, dietary variability.
Yeah.
If you just look at, say, 100 people, you're going to see wide variance of polyphenol intake, which can impact how they actually respond to polyphenol supplements, for example. We're doing some research right now looking at a particular polyphenol and how it affects inflammation. So I do think that the future of polyphenols is kind of, I see that's where it's going in terms of the research.
Yeah.
So I do see a benefit.
Yeah. So I probably should have said polyphenols are nutrients that are found in plant-based foods, particularly the rich colours, aren't they? But some are used, extracted as well from those foods and utilised as supplements. So you can get a lot in the diet, but also potentially utilise as supplements.
I think one thing that's really important is, we talk about polyphenols and what they do.
Yeah.
Polyphenols have multiple potential effects.
Yep.
but it's probably more the secondary metabolites in a way. In other words, as the polyphenol is broken down, it produces or converts to these other chemicals, and they're the ones that, if they're having a physiological effect, are probably having a physiological effect.
Yeah.
So a polyphenol is probably most active at the gut level.
Yeah, I was going to say the gut's plays a really important role in that, doesn't it? Again, yeah. And also, polyphenols are really useful for supporting the gut microbiome at the same time. There's this nice...
They can act as prebiotics.
Yeah, so there's this kind of nice dual relationship between them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about creatine and polyphenols, but also some people utilise caffeine a lot for improving performance. So obviously there's sort of positives and negatives to using caffeine, because we can get an increase in adrenaline, stress hormones, etc. But what's your opinion on using caffeine?
So I think it comes back to, why are you taking the caffeine?
Yeah.
So what's the purpose? Is it so for example, some people will take caffeine as part of a pre-workout supplement, because they need that kind of that boost, if you like, to get them through the session, especially if you're tired. But then again, that's kind of putting a band-aid on a problem. If you're tired, why are you then training? You're not recovering. Caffeine has a metabolic, it can have a thermogenic and a metabolic effect. So if you're looking to try and enhance fat utilization during training, that could be where caffeine might have a role to play. It can also have a psychological effect as well, in terms of brain stimulation, etc. So, if you look at people that are running longer distances, this is where caffeine at the end of the race could be quite beneficial, where you're starting to get tired and, energy starting to drop. That caffeine kick might just have a small impact on performance. But then you've got people that respond to caffeine and those that don't. And so a lot of the research shows there is a particular dose response. If you take too much caffeine, it's not necessarily better. If you take too little caffeine, it's probably not going to have much of an effect. So there is that kind of threshold of caffeine. And then you've got people that respond, they're habitual caffeine consumers, who might respond differently to those that don't take caffeine. And this then comes down to how you metabolize caffeine. So if you've got a particular metabolic profile, you may metabolize caffeine quite fast. So you may not have the same type of effect as someone who metabolizes it quite slowly. So I think there's a bunch
there's
of
a lot
here,
going on again, down to the individual. But I think some people sort of often just try use it just to keep themselves awake and going, and I think that's when it can potentially become problematic, when you feel like you need to have it just because
once you've started taking it, you do get a drop-off effect, so you have to keep taking it. So there is that issue as well.
100%. Okay, so maybe just a little bit on recovery. Well, I suppose this is again a big topic, but what can people do to recover, and does that depend on the individual and what they're doing again? Do you sometimes need big rest periods, etc.? Again, let me think. What went through my head as you said that was, I remember, I think one of the key things so it depends on the type of person you're working with. So if it's someone who's a very high profile, high competitive athlete, for them performance is everything. And I used to have the mentality that if I missed a training session and I was in a build up for a big competition or an event, missing a session was not good, because you're not getting the adaptations. And then there was one year where I caught a cold, and it was December, this time of year. And I had to take January off. I just couldn't go training. I was, coughing and spluttering. I went back in the pool in about mid-February. So I'd had 6 weeks off swim training. I'd maintained a bit of training, but I'd really, reduced my volume and intensity. And I went back in the pool, and I just missed a personal best by 3 seconds. And it was, where did that come from? Because my head had said, I've got to keep pushing, but actually allowing the body to catch me up and recover and adapt was actually the best thing I could have done. So I think recovery is important depending on where you are in your routine. To go back to the other point I wanted to make, which was when people talk about recovery, what I often hear is, what can I take just after exercise to recover? And that's not how the body adapts. There is a fast and a slow and a very slow phase. So you have to think about recovery over kind of hours and days. So if I'm going to the gym on a Monday,
and I'm not really too competitive, and I just want to get fit and healthy, and I'm not training again till Wednesday, that kind of recovery window is less important than someone who is training on a Monday morning and going back in the gym on a Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
So depending on what you're doing has an impact on how you think about recovery. So for the person who's training maybe twice a day, or maybe a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, for them, that ability to bounce back between sessions is kind of important.
Yeah.
Because otherwise their quality of training is going to start to decline. But for the average person who might be going to the gym 3 times a week, 2 times a week, whatever it is, it's about just gradually recovering. So they can probably do most of it through their diet. If I'm training very intensely, or I've got multiple sessions in a week, this is where that early phase of recovery could be quite important. So as an example, if I'm just trying to think about some of the athletes we work with who have morning sessions, and then they were back in the gym for strength training in the afternoon. So for them, maximizing that early recovery phase within the first hour and the second 3 or 4 hours after that were kind of important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they were going into their second session tired, not quite topped up, etc. So the way I always used to think about it is think about carbohydrate and protein.
Yep.
And I always used to use a 2-to-1 ratio for carbohydrates to protein, unless it was intensive, and I'd go as high as 4-to-1 ratio. So if you think about it from a perspective of what that might mean. So if you've got, say, I'll make it easy for me, because if you've got a 100-kilo athlete or individual, that's going to be 100 grams of that's going to be 200 grams of carbohydrate to 100 grams of protein.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a lot going on there. But you don't need to go as high as that in some people. If you're doing very intensive, it's about amplifying that carbohydrate recovery, because they've probably used their muscle glycogen more aggressively, more intensely.
So if you've got sort of soreness after exercise, is it best to wait until that's subsided? Or can people...
Again, this is what we're looking at right now, because it's so individual.
Yeah.
Some people, if I went and did 50 squats right now, I probably wouldn't be able to walk tomorrow. But, for some people, they just work their way through. So in the early part of a training program, you will, if you're unaccustomed to the exercise, you're likely going to experience some sort of discomfort, because you've just used muscles that you're not using regularly. But it does subside over time. So your body adapts to that inflammation and that disruption. So you adapt over time. I kind of feel like there might be, this is where I think polyphenols might have a role to play. Because if you can dampen that response in the early phase, you might get back to training more readily.
Yeah.
So it might have an acute role, not necessarily a chronic role.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What I think is really interesting when you're in this kind of world of, holistic functional medicine or nutrition, whatever you want to call it, is that there was all these things we did historically.
Oh yeah.
And then now the science is, we sort of went away from it when modern life came along, and then the science is now proving that what we were doing just sort of intuitively.
Did you know that? One of the first cases of intermittent fasting for performance was medieval knights?
Wow.
Did you know that?
No.
Because they had to restrict their diet.
Makes sense.
It was more about giving food to the poor, but by doing so, they actually had very strict diets. And they did it partly for performance.
Yeah.
That's where it traces back to. There you go. Yeah.
Oh, so I'll show something about intermittent fasting.
Did you know the first London marathon? There was a guy there who he won it, but he was given brandy and strychnine as a shot to try and get him going. Because back then it was like pick you up. So what he was hammered, but he was taking rat poison effectively, and he promptly collapsed on the finish line.
Oh,
don't quote me on that one. Thomas Wicks, I think his name was. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, talking actually, because I've got a question about hormetic stress. So talking about taking small amounts of something that's mildly toxic or damaging, like polyphenols, because in excess they can in significant excess can be potentially toxic. And also things like cold exposure and all of that. Exercise does that as well. It just ramps up, it creates hormetic stress, and that. Well, what does that do? I was sort of telling you, but yeah.
Yeah, no, you just said it. No, hormesis is, it's all about creating a little bit of stress that the body then has to deal with it and adapt. And in doing so, you get benefits in the longer term.
Yeah.
But you can overshoot that if you go too hard, or if you make the training or the diet too aggressive. You can actually blunt some of those responses. So this is where the concept of hormesis comes in.
Yeah, and fasting as well, because can that be? We sort of mentioned fasting, but you're talking about intermittent fasting.
Yeah. I would class that as a form of hormetic stress.
Yeah. And in the long term, potentially, we were saying just now that the first evidence we have of intermittent fasting from medieval nights, so that can potentially,
at least what I read anyhow.
Yeah, be interesting. Who was the researcher in that?
Yeah, this is the big problem. So you've got a lot of information that goes back to sort of Greek times. That does crop up in the literature. Then there seems to be this gap, and and mixed responses and mixed. I've read quite a lot of different books that give me mixed responses. But the medieval knights and what they used to use in preparation for some of the tournaments is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I love all that stuff.
It was actually a sort of fast feast approach.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting.
Yeah. Actually, just think about recovery and muscle soreness. I know I'm jumping around again, but is it for, again, Joe Average, is it quite useful for them to have a mixture of different types of training? Or do people, I know obviously with elite athletes, they're very focused on one form of exercise, but they probably incorporate other forms of training.
I think even at elite level, they do a variety. It's not just one thing. But I mean, if you're playing, say, a particular sport, you're going to play that sport, but you'll do other things to complement the how your body adapts to the training. I think with general people, I think really mixing it up is important, both for motivation, but B, for comprehensiveness.
Yeah.
So, so for example, we used to do a lot of functional training as part of triathlon. What I mean by functional training is things like, movements that mimic what you're doing, like running, but from a static perspective. So it could be like deadlifts or one-leg squats or one-legged deadlifts, etc. So you're really trying to use the body in a dynamic way that then pays off when you then apply it in a sport or exercise setting. But I think if you've got someone who's not really into sport and just looking for their general fitness, you've got cardiovascular fitness, you've got muscular fitness, you've got immune fitness, you could go on and on and on. So you need variety to tackle all of those different areas.
Yeah. Yeah. And it comes back to almost that functional movement. If you're just doing squats every day, which probably no one will ever necessarily do, maybe they do.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a lot of benefit necessarily, as opposed to, mixing up and trying to move in the way that we're designed to.
Correct.
Yeah.
I also would add to that, there's kind of a balance between training indoors and outdoors. I think there's a lot of benefits of actually being in nature and actually doing. I mean, I used to love going out for a run in the outdoors. I preferred that more than running on a treadmill. So
I think that had benefits for mental health, particularly as well. Obviously, exercise is great for mental health, but if you can combine that with being out in nature at the same time, it's almost, it's like double whammy potentially.
I also think everyone's different, of course, but I used to thrive around being with other people. So if we ever went out for a bike ride or a cycle or whatever, or a run, just being around other people made a real impact on your ability. It just took your mind off things completely. So you're able to do a lot more. So it depends on the type of person you are.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, just to sort of summarise, I know this again is a big question, but for those people that really struggle to think about exercise and moving, don't really enjoy it, massive question, but what if we can just sort of do a brief summary of the benefits people achieve from...
How long's the podcast?
I know, exactly.
I mean, there's so much research showing the benefits of exercise, everything from, mental health to physical health, from cardiovascular to digestive to muscle health, hormonal benefits, the list goes on and on and on. And we could break it right down into exactly what's going on in those systems. But, the biggest issue one of the things that is really kind of, I think, not spoken about as much as it should be is what's called sarcopenia. So as we get older, unfortunately, muscle does decline. We do decline with age, and there's a thing called sarcopenia, which is where you have a reduction in your muscle mass. So if you look at a picture of someone in their 20s, and you looked at a cross section of their thigh, for example, you'd see a kind of a large amount of muscle, small amount of body fat. on that particular part of the body. And then as you get older, you'll see that muscle just slowly deteriorating. And it's most likely because they haven't used it in the same way. They're not using it. But there is also a decline in muscle mass. There is something called anabolic resistance, which just means that your body just starts to not respond to proteins in quite the same way. But you can, there are studies showing that if you are active in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you don't necessarily negate this, but you can have a big difference to someone who is not doing any exercise.
Yeah.
And for me, that's kind of a big thing, because if you've got people that are deteriorating with age and not exercising, and then they have a major issue, could they have at least extended their health span, if you like, or their functionality by being more active in their kind of mid years?
Yeah, 100%. And if, as early as possible, because obviously I think what happens, like we were saying, when we're children, we move all the time, and then that starts to decline. And I think people suddenly get into their late 30s, 40s and go, oh, maybe I need to start doing something. And I think that's a really important time to...
I think the earlier you can start and more consistent you can be, that's the kind of, for me, the key. I mean, we haven't spoken about longevity or anything, but one of the things I'm absolutely fascinated by, I don't know why, but it's the Blue Zones diet. And I got fascinated because I've been to a number of the Blue Zone areas, and I've been quite intrigued by why people there seem to live longer than others. And the one thing that really stood out for me was you're kind of in very remote areas or more rural areas where you have to move.
Yeah.
And so movement is the key, I think. There are lots of other factors that have a role to play.
Yeah.
But for me, it's that kind of movement, because people say, well, in those areas, you're less stressed. Well, maybe, but then you could also talk about the harshness of living in those environments and the stress that might be involved with lifestyle anyhow. But the way they eat is very natural most of the time. Their movement is a lot more than the average person.
Yeah.
So for me, that kind of,
Yeah, and I think there's something about nowadays we live in, climate controlled, we're not exposed, we have heating all the time. So we do exactly. Yeah. So our lives are much more comfortable. We don't have to move. Yeah. Food is readily available all the time. Whereas it used to be, it used to be periods of feast and famine. Yeah. And we had to move to go out and get our food. Now you can just dial, Just Eat, and it's there. And I think those people in the blue zones do live a bit more. Well, they do live more
in
kind
nature,
of
more in synergy with nature.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that it's very specific to like rural areas. There are, if you look at the blue zone definition, or like the number of people who are living beyond 100, there are many cities around the world where they have a high number of people living beyond 100 as well.
Yeah.
But it's in the rural, it's very interesting just observing like the patterns.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of intrigued by the movement pattern.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that I was listening to speak quite a while ago, but they were basically saying we have to move because we haven't evolved not to move. Because basically it's only been maybe the last 20 to 50 years where we haven't had to be physical as much as we used to. Historically, we've, you can't really get away with just sitting down all day. You die pretty quickly. So it's obviously just fundamental to our physiology.
I think so.
Yeah. Just to finish off, just from your, all the research that you're doing, and I know you've sort of mentioned quite a lot of things that you're going to be looking at, but where would you like to go next, or what do you think is the sort of really interesting areas of, research that if someone came to you with a massive grant, which I'm sure you'd love.
Thank you very much.
Putting out a plug there.
I'm already looking at polyphenols. I see the polyphenols in particular, I see them as a kind of an amplifier of other, so if you look at some of the mechanisms behind polyphenols, they may have synergistic or amplification effects with other nutrients. So I'm kind of intrigued by that. Health span. I think there's a big interest in health span. We're actually going to be doing a study next year to try and understand perceptions of health span in younger people.
Interesting.
So if you've any parents listening and you want your children involved, and
I think people think they're invincible, don't they, when they're younger?
Well, I think it's also, at a young age, when you go back to like most people, they pick up at 30 or above and they go, oh, suddenly I need to start doing some exercise.
Yeah.
What's stopping the thinking earlier on? And so we want to try and understand that a little bit more, because if you can come up with a strategy or a program or even an education package that encourages younger people to be more engaged with their own health from an earlier age, not necessarily talking about longevity or not even talking about disease states, it's more what's going to engage you more consistently over time.
Yeah.
And I think that could be interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I've got 2 teenagers, so I'll take me up for that one.
And I think the other one that's really obvious is just, looking at ways to engage older people, because, you said about some people don't start until they're 30 or above.
Yeah.
Well, we forget about people in their 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And, there's not a lot of information that is readily accessible for older people to know what they should do and where they should be.
Yeah.
Without bringing any family members into play, if you go and ask them how many sit-ups can you do, not sit-ups or any exercise, a squat or a stand or a walking test, what can they do and what's normal for them?
Yeah.
So this is an area I feel that's quite important.
Yeah, and I think that is important, because I think there's a little bit of fear around moving too much and injuring themselves,
Sure.
and then so that may hold them back quite significantly as well.
But then you go back to the blue zones.
Yeah.
And then you go and look at older people in some of those zones. What is it that's a differentiating factor is where they live and what they're doing.
Yeah.
If you go to a place like Okinawa, for example, in some of the research I've read, it talks about older people getting up in the morning. The first thing they do is go and attend to their garden.
Yeah.
So what are they doing? They're exercising
Yeah.
first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
And they're functionally exercising.
Yeah.
So, and they're still at that age. So, yes, they've been doing it throughout their lives, which means if you start earlier, you're more likely going to have that impact later in life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a difference between people think understanding of what exercise is, perhaps when you're talking about functional movement, they don't necessarily think I'm going out to do exercise. They just go and tend to their garden. And
I would say it's something that is either a necessity, or something you enjoy, and you do consistently.
Yeah. I think that sums it up perfectly. So understanding your body, move a lot and maintain consistency.
Yeah.
And can't go too far wrong.
There you go.
Thanks so much, Justin. It's been an excellent conversation.
Thank
and it's been really fun. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Beyond the Capsule. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If this conversation has sparked any thoughts or questions and you'd like to learn more, don't hesitate to get in touch with our nutritional therapists at nutrition@cytoplan.co.uk. We're Cytoplan, inspired by nature, proven by science, and driven by purpose.